he moved it back a little bit, but he was still unrealistically optimistic. Last we heard was Tesla had only, and I put it in quotes because, of course, it's still significant, but only doubled their compute capacity. And they had been talking about orders of magnitudes more, and doubling is just simply not going to cut it. Now, I don't know where they are right now versus when they had that statement, but based on Musk tweeting that they're basically don't have enough and it's going to come maybe at the end of the year, um, just means obviously the iterative speed for V12 may be bottlenecked by compute for at least another 6 months.
Yeah, well, first I disagree with Machine that Elon tweeted something, saying they don't have enough compute to solve FSD or anything like that. I think, I mean, he said before that compute is the primary constraint as opposed to engineering talent now, which is definitely still true. But I think the tweet he was talking about was maybe about text to video generation in Sora. And he mentioned that they had, they have this text to video model that they use to generate training data, like synthetic training data that's like really, really realistic without having to go through the simulator. And they've been doing that for some time. And Ashok mentioned at CVPR that they can even put YouTube videos or other videos in there. And it's a, sort of general framework that works for that. But I think he said we're not going to dedicate compute to training a model like that right now because we're focused on FSD Beta 12. But later in the year, when compute is less of a constraint, then we may work on training a more generalized text to video model or something like that, similar to what we've done with the synthetic training data. So I don't think there's really any new information there. Um, they've said before that compute is a constraint, so I definitely didn't see anything that would cause me to change my timeline. Then the other interesting story this morning is people seem to be seeing a glitch in the release notes where FSD beta 12.2.1 is showing up as opposed to FSD 11.4.9 in the release notes. The software on their car appears to actually be 11.4.9 based on what it says in the software screen, but it looks like somehow the release notes say 12.2.1. So there were a lot of surprised people who took delivery and found out that their car had FSD Beta 12.2 on it. And other people looking at the release notes now, they're all seeing 12.2. So that's kind of a crazy glitch. Originally, when I saw it, I was thinking, okay, wow, so they're actually probably taking this to wide release if it's pre-installed on cars, other people are seeing it. But unfortunately, it seems to just be some type of release note mix up. But it could be hinting that they're about to do a release of 12.2. We did see the 12.2.1 branch go out to employees yesterday. So we could see it go out to other people, myself, other early access testers, possibly as early as today. So I'm hoping that we see that today or this week. And, you know, there's a question really of how wide they take it. Do they send it just to the same group of 100 people? Do they send it to all the early access testers? Do they go wide? Elon did say on the earnings call that they were planning to send out FSD Beta 12 in the coming weeks, right? So it's kind of an interesting thing what's going on here. This release note mix up is kind of strange. I don't think I've seen anything like it, especially not with a release as anticipated as this one. So that was, kind of a crazy thing to see this morning, but hopefully it hints that FSD Beta 12 really is going to go wider very soon.
Have you guys tried OpenAI's Sora?
It's not available yet. It's being red teamed right now.
So how many people have access to it?
As many people as have access to FSD Beta 12.
Google doesn't have an answer to Sora at this time, is that right?
No, I don't think so. I
Wow.
don't know.
Machine, are you following these releases? OpenAI, Sora, Gemini's 1.5?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know the details of Gemini other than it's got a much longer token window. But Sora, for sure, obviously is a new, novel thing. There's no competitor as of now. Um, and it's obviously impressive. And you just think about all the possibilities of what's going to change in the world with these models. I don't think it's really particularly useful for Tesla, but in terms of
What do you
change,
mean? It is useful for Tesla. They've been using it for over a year for training data.
no, they use simulation, right? But I don't think they need Sora. So I'm
I
just
mean, they
saying.
don't need Sora, but they use a text to video model to generate variations on their training data. They talked
Yep.
about this at CVPR. Also, I did a quick Google search, and I think Google does actually have a text to video model called Lumiere. So I pinned a post from January about that. But it looks like it's not as good.
Yeah, I mean, people are convinced that OpenAI Sora is going to revolutionize movie making. So whereas it took $100 million to make a blockbuster, more than $100 million, now you can an amateur filmmaker can produce something. I mean, even today, but especially in the next few months, in the next couple of years, amateur filmmakers will be able to make movies of that quality without all the production cost machine.
There's definitely going to be a huge field and a market to use this in. I don't think it's going to replace every artistic avenue, because do people do, at least my generation, care about the actual people? There's sometimes associative bonds with the actors and actresses, or musicians, for instance, and it's maybe hard to replace that. For instance, I've always loved the band Fleetwood Mac, and I just don't think a Sora generated video is going to allow me to understand these characters that slept with each other and snorted so much cocaine that they had to go into rehab. What Sora is not going to replicate that. I'm not going to have that bond with these people.
I mean, I think you look long term, yes, this is going to revolutionize filmmaking. A 5-year-old child will be able to type in a text box and generate a movie that is, motion picture quality from their bedroom in time. Now, kind of like FSD and autonomy, we're a ways off from that today. Like, this thing can generate 1 minute long videos without audio, and they're not perfect videos. Some of them are very strange. For example, someone had a glass breaking and its interpretation of a glass breaking, and the glass flies up into the air, and the liquid somehow gets onto the table. So it doesn't have this perfect modeling of physics. Someone had a giant, dog walking around the city, and when it stepped on people, they just disappeared, right? So we're very early on here, but it's clear that this is probably going to work just as well as an LLM can write a story today in time. And it's just going to keep getting bigger and bigger. It's something that kind of scales with compute. So one of the questions I have is, what does it cost to inference this thing, right? So, what's the inference cost of, say, a 1 minute video, and how many times do I need to do it to get it to look exactly, acceptable for my purposes? Now, I imagine it's probably a lot less than hiring a video graphics guy, as a CGI guy, whatever. But, theoretically, it could be more expensive. I don't have a good handle on what the costs are. So it'd be interesting to get some information on that.
Omar, what do you expect for Wednesday's Nvidia earnings?
Well, I think they'll continue to show strong growth, but they need to just really have exceptional numbers in every metric. Good growth isn't enough. It really needs to be explosive to sustain the market's expectations. So I think it'll be good, but it really better be good. It really better be phenomenal. So expectations are high.
I agree. I actually built a model on Nvidia with some crazy assumptions to look at what are the implied multiples, etc. There was a couple of weeks ago, and it looks attainable because they have crazy high margins. But as Omar just said, they really priced for exceptional numbers. So if they deliver short on that, or almost more importantly, if Jensen sounds cautious, that could create a reaction. I don't think it would be too crazy because so much, I don't want to call it hype, but let's call it so much enthusiasm about AI, etc., in the air right now that I don't know, we might see negative 5, 6, 7, 8%, but then probably quickly people will then use the situation to buy a bit more um, Nvidia stock.
BYD is planning to repurchase more shares, the automaker said in a filing on Sunday, as it seeks to revive a stock price slump resulting in a 15-month low earlier this month. The Shenzhen-based company also said it aims to ramp up production of more luxury models this year, boosting its credentials beyond just stylish but budget-friendly cars. BYD's stock market performance has taken a hit as broader fears of a renewed industry price war spook investors. Shares in China more broadly have tumbled on wider concerns over the country's economic performance. Chinese EV makers Hong Kong listed stock closed down 1.9% on Monday, bringing losses this year to around 13%. BYD on Monday upped the price pressure on rivals by unraveling a revamped version of its flagship Keen Plus plug-in hybrid sedan that starts at $11,000. BYD has said in the past it's determined to produce battery-powered EVs that are cheaper than fossil fuel-powered cars. The Keen Plus move, rival SAIC GM Whirling Automobile, a joint venture between GM, SAIC, and Whirling Motors, said it would also cut the price of their sedan by 6,000 yuan, which is about close to $1,000. BYD on Monday, the ongoing price war has already shown up in BYD's results. It guided toward a preliminary 2023 net income of between 29 billion yuan and 31 billion yuan, a short of analyst estimates of 31.5 billion. Record deliveries in the fourth quarter when BYD overtook Tesla as the world's top seller of electric cars didn't translate into another bumper profit. Fourth quarter net income will be between 7.2 billion yuan to 9.2 billion yuan, according to Bloomberg calculations, down from the previous quarter's 10.9 billion. So that's about a 20% drop. BYD previously conducted a 1.8 billion yuan A-share buyback in June 2022. BYD's A shares listed in Shenzhen closed 1.3% higher after Chinese stocks resumed trading following the Lunar New Year break. AJ, what do you think about BYD's stock buyback?
I think it's very, very aggressive because they're in a very tricky spot. I mean, you all guys know they've been growing explosively. That's probably the best word to describe it. But um, they they really haven't generated a lot more profit, and that's why also the analysts were quite disappointed when they didn't really generate more net income from the significantly increased volume. Um, then also there's a concern that they're sort of running out of space in their large home market, and now for the basically first time ever, there's a significant focus on their overseas strategy or sales success. And I actually personally noticed a significant uptick in BYD advertisements in my country. And I spoke to other people in other countries, and they noticed the same. I'm talking about European countries. And you probably saw the headlines a few weeks ago. BYD is sending ships full with vehicles to Europe, and there was a lot of talk about kind of Chinese invasion of the German auto market. Um, so far, but it's early days. uh, in the countries that report daily or monthly, there's n- there's certainly more Chinese sales than a year ago, but it's not like they have like any meaningful market share as of yet, as of now. But we have to see how this first 6 months will unravel, and how whether these Chinese vehicles can catch on beyond potential commercial buyers, because often what I've seen in my years in the auto industry, when there are new brands trying to sell vehicles in new markets, what they usually do as the first thing is they try to line up some, let's call it anchor buyers, like some large fleet owners, and they sell them several hundreds of vehicles at a huge discount so that normal people actually see these vehicles on the roads. I would just I expect a similar strategy in BYD for Europe. So there will be some sales, but how long they will last, and not just create some sales spikes, we have yet to see. Because NIO is a good example. NIO, for example, um, they started at the beginning of last year in selling the vehicles in Europe, and they did exactly the same thing. So we saw some months where they had some nice spikes, but then it quickly ebbed off, and it was just a one-off effect from these large vehicle sales, and it never recovered. And but NIO is a completely different category of vehicle compared to BYD. BYD, I think, is actually mostly competing with brands like the Volkswagen brand or the Seat brand or the lower cost Skoda brand, and not and I don't see them as a competitor directly to Tesla, because there's I sat in all the BYD vehicles because BYD brought them in September to Munich to the larger auto show, and when I sat in these vehicles, I felt like, okay, they feel well built, and they delivered kind of the standard of they have a more traditional feel to them, more ice feel. And I can see, if I was a Skoda, like a no brand buyer, Skoda is not a really a meaningful brand. You buy it for the value. Um, I can see why I might consider BYD, because I'm apparently a customer who doesn't care about brand. So this is a acceptable vehicle. So I think these people need to worry about BYD. So it's a bigger picture. Coming back to the bigger BYD group point, the reason why this buyback is so aggressive, because the international expansion is going to absorb a lot of capital. Because if the inventory they sell with all these ships to Europe, if it doesn't sell, it's a huge cash drain, and BYD doesn't have a huge cash reserve. Of course, they can always lever up and can improve their cash position, um, but 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 again, I think this would be crazy. So I really struggle to see why they did this now. Um, it's because the BYD, the other prime BYD has, it's a Chinese company, and when you look at the Chinese stock market overall over the last 15 years, it basically hasn't done anything really compared to the S&P 500, etc. So there's a much bigger problem. I feel like it's kind of a dumb idea to try to get a short-term sugar high via buyback. So the whole thing doesn't really make sense for me, especially right now as they try to expand internationally, which will be highly cash absorbing. So I stop here.
Thanks, AJ. Omar, what do you think about BYD's buyback?
Well, it's a pretty small buyback, right? How much was it? Like few tens of millions of dollars?
Is it? The article doesn't say, but it sounds small.
Yeah, I mean, the Chinese stock market has not been doing well. So they're kind of doing that thing they do where they go, "Okay, guys, stop selling." Or, it's illegal to sell, that kind of thing. And it's really kind of the Chinese property bubble, the liquidation of Evergrande, all this stuff is kind of just weighing on equities. You have less foreign investment. So I think this is kind of the backdrop of it. You just have a lot of weakness in the Chinese equity market, and they're trying to do something, but I don't think they really have the capacity to do that much of a buyback. So I'm not sure. I didn't like verify the information myself, but I saw somebody reply to my tweet and they said it's something like, you know, $50 million or something like that. I don't know.
They're selling vehicles for $11,000. That's kind of the more shocking part of the article. It sounds like they're still profitable.
Yeah, I mean, some of you guys may have seen my analysis, but I tried to back out the profitability of the vehicles because BYD lumps everything together in the segment disclosure, which makes zero sense with their huge batteries business. And when you, I think, apply some high level but sensible assumptions, you basically arrive at the conclusion that they have close to zero profitability on their vehicles. And when you look at the net profit and how lucrative actually other large battery makers are, then you see that the auto business is like a complete disaster. And the interesting thing about BYD is they've been talking about spinning off the batteries business for uh, I think 2 years, and supposedly this year it's going to happen. So we would see for the first time in 3 years the underlying auto business then separate, because they would have to restate at least I think 2 financial years, and then we would see whether basically that is correct, that they have basically close to zero profitability in the auto business, and that would be kind of a shocking result, I think.
So, according to an exchange filing in December 2023, BYD recommended a buyback of shares worth 200 million yuan. That's about 27 million USD. The overall goal behind this move is to boost investor confidence and maintain stability in the firm's value.
So it's just a marketing stunt.
Omar, what do you think BYD's market cap should be? Or if you don't want to answer, I'll ask AJ too.
Let's see. BYD market cap 71 billion. Sounds about right.
AJ, what do you think?
To be honest with you, I haven't built a valuation model. I largely looked at their historical financials, and I was most interested in their profitability. But if they, I mean, the auto business is highly capital intensive, and given their super low profitability, there might be, like, when you do proper valuation, you might actually arrive at the result that the auto business, you would, like a business like BYD, you would always do on a sum of the parts, and you would split out the batteries, the autos business. You might, if you do it properly, you would probably even would split the ICE business out from the EV business, assuming that in the next 10-15 years the ICE business will end. And ICE, I also mean hybrids. And so you would not apply a perpetuity value to that segment. So I'm not going to go too much into detail, but you would do some of the parts, and there might be, it might actually turn out, if you do the analysis, that the auto business has right now zero value. If you don't produce excess returns above your cost of equity, very simple, because of the high capital intensive nature of the business. And for example, when you look at Toyota, people who follow my post probably saw this. Toyota is basically generating no cash. So to the auto business, like, if there's no excess cash coming out of the business, then there's basically no long-term capital returns story here, and therefore the business, you could argue, has zero value in a sense. And the but BYD's big value, I think, is the batteries business, because they have some apparently very good tech that is on par with Cattle, and Cattle might be the most advanced battery maker right now, with one little caveat. Panasonic seems to have the best track record when it comes to battery reliability, because I think they have had, in over 10 years, zero recalls of their batteries. So that's quite special. And so anyways, I would basically value BYD mostly on the batteries business, I think, and the long-term potential of that.
Okay. So Omar believes BYD's current market cap is about reasonable. AJ says BYD Automotive is not very valuable because it depends mostly on ICE and hybrid sales, but BYD's battery business could be valuable. So,
Could I just add one very big point about the Chinese auto market in general?
okay.
So that the I mean everybody knows Chinese auto market is by units by far the largest auto market in the world. But there's another very peculiar feature about that market, and there are, depending on how you count, around 4 to 10 Chinese auto companies that are either directly or indirectly controlled by some form of government. And some form of government, I mean either the central government or some state government. And actually in China, they can have very different agendas. It's quite complicated, but the bottom line is these are state actors, and these state actors they're not driven by uh, return requirements, earning your cost of equity, etc. And so they have different agendas. They want to further the employment in the state. They require the factories to be in the state, etc. All this kind of industrial policy stuff. So it's not about making really lots of money. It's really making sure social cohesion and employment provision, etc. And all this stuff. So you basically have these very large auto companies in China that capture a big chunk of the market that do not have to earn cost of equity, and that creates a huge competitive problem. There are other markets like this in other industries. One I'm very familiar with is the one in Germany. The German retail banking market is very similar to this. In Germany, we have about 50% of the market is in the hands of the savings banks, and they are basically government owned. So these savings banks, they also don't need to earn cost of equity, don't have to pay dividends. So they pass this cost saving on to the customer. And that's why these tiny savings banks are highly competitive with the large commercial banks, like Deutsche Bank or some other HVB Bank, etc. So that's why the German retail banking market is horrible. And I think a similar sort of dynamics apply to the Chinese market, where you have these very large state automakers, and they don't need to make money. They can basically pass on these cost savings. They basically can lower the prices effectively, become more competitive. So the end result is you can only compete with these guys and make money if you're highly innovative. And I think there's only very few companies who can actually be so competitive that they can make up for this, um, let's call it cost of capital disadvantage.
Meta, how are you?
Good. I was hoping to have more time today, but I only have about 15-20 minutes.
Okay. Which one do you want to talk about? OpenAI Sora, Gemini's 1.5, or Nvidia earnings?
I'll opt not for Nvidia earnings because I didn't follow it.
Okay. Well, clearly you haven't followed because they haven't announced yet.
There you go. I have not been following.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. Okay. So OpenAI Sora doesn't have competition, huh, at this time? They're like the only player. Is that right?
Not true. It's a research paper that was announced on the same day that VJEPA was announced by Meta, Facebook. I'm just going to say Facebook because it's confusing. And DeepMind released Lumiere 3 weeks ago, which is pretty much the same thing as Sora, but they're both research papers. One just got more press.
Wow. I mean, okay, so if that's the case, if it's literally a PR issue, OpenAI is killing every single time, right? And Omar
Yeah,
says that these models in the longer term are going to look very similar. So is it really going to be just about PR and marketing?
it's about hardware and the way you make your software scalable. That's what's kind of exciting about the Gemini. Well, obviously, I work in this space, so I need to be conscientious. I'm very biased, but I do think the hardware and the software cost reductions, just like in the vehicle space, is what's going to differentiate the competition. Because if you can't get your costs down to the point where you can serve, you can only burn money for so long. And right now, everything else in this world is like at a place where you have to justify money, except there's still this like kind of VC bubble happening for AI where you can raise tons of money, just say you're doing something in AI, and they let you burn money for a long time, but eventually you have to figure out how you're going to make money. And all these systems may not be profitable enough to maintain the cash burn rates if they don't figure that out soon.
Is that why he's raising $7 trillion?
I don't know if that's actually true or not. I think that might be just like a rumor mill, but is he raising it a 7 trillion valuation? Because 7 trillion is a ridiculous number to try and raise.
Omar?
Yeah, I mean, this seemed maybe there's just like some meme value there or something. I think what they said is that they would ultimately need to raise up to 5 to 7 trillion or something like that, like thinking super long term. Not like they're raising a $7 trillion seed round or something like that, although I imagine you would need probably billions, maybe hundreds of billions of dollars to get into making chips in a serious way. So, I don't really know what he's thinking there, but Google definitely has an advantage in having TPUs, that sort of integration there. There's a few different advantages you can have. You can have a compute advantage. You can have a data advantage. You could have something like YouTube, I think would be amazing for training a model like this. You've got videos of pretty much every kind. So, um, yeah, you know, there's other models that have actually been released. Sora is just kind of a paper at this point. They say they have some people red teaming it, but you have like Stable Video, for example, from Stable Diffusion and other models. Their output isn't as good. So it's not necessarily that this is the first text to video model ever. Like, even Tesla has a text to video model they've been using internally for generating some training data, but I think people were more just looking at sort of the quality of this output as really being standout. And so they're using this diffusion transformer uh, paper from a few months ago, and it was kind of interesting some of the little details they talked about. So instead of tokens, they have sort of patches. They called it where sort of is like the equivalent of a token, but for the video space, and they sort of compress the video into like this sort of latent space. Um, so there's some interesting stuff there, but again, when can I use it? What's it going to cost me? Those are kind of my key questions right now. And once I can actually get my hands on it, then I can really start to form more of an opinion.
Yeah, the video and the launch to me seems more reactionary, and so it's maybe more polished. But have you seen the Lumiere video or the VJEPA videos or anything from Stable
I
Diffusion
think
Asia?
I've browsed their website. So I mean, I was impressed with all of them, right? Because I had never seen AI text to video before. So each one was, successively impressive to me, and we're just starting to scratch the surface of what this can do. Um, but just like LLMs, right? ChatGPT had this big splashy launch, 100 million users or whatever, but ultimately, you've got great models from Google, Gemini doing things that the OpenAI models cannot do, right? If you're trying to build, just a retrieval system for your data or something, having a million token context window or a 10 million token context window compared to like 32K or 64K, it completely eliminates the need to do retrieval augmented generation and all that bullshit and chunking, and it's just a better model, right? So if I'm trying to court an enterprise, that's a big selling point right there. And okay, I'm already using Google Cloud, whatever. I can just sort of call that API. Then you've got the open source models. I can inference that on my own GPU. You got Facebook out here putting out Llama 2. They're going to put out a Llama 3, and that's free to use, even for commercial purposes, even if you want to make money on it. So you can just download that. You can inference that on your own GPU in your own data center, control your costs. You don't have to pay some absurd markup. And that's a great option too. If you just need something kind of simple that a model like that can handle, you got a Mistral out of France, all these open source models. People are just publishing them on Hugging Face, remixing them, doing different variants, medical focus variants, whatever. So it's an incredibly competitive space. Um, they certainly have one of the best brand names in AI, but who's ultimately going to win the customers? It's definitely not set in stone yet.
There's also, I think, the X factor here. Not, like everybody on X is following certain accounts. There's like little bubbles that occur, and I think there's a high overlap between um, Sam Altman's followers and Elon's followers. But as an example, I think it's telling that Elon gave a congratulations, just saying congratulations out to Sundar after the announcement of the 1 to 10 million tokens. And importantly, in the paper, they point out they tested it all the way up to 10 million, but the needle in the haystack didn't start to fail. So that it's not like they're saying it scales only to 10 million. It's more of a like, it didn't make sense to keep going beyond this because 10 million tokens, trying to make this a little bit more reasonable to understand, it's equivalent of 0.16% of the entirety of Wikipedia in English. So while it's not like 1%, but you could see, like, let's say it went up to 100 million. At that point, it's like, what kind of the questions are you asking that requires 1% of, I would argue Wikipedia is on the order of human knowledge? What kind of questions require 1% of all knowledge to answer the question? Not many things. You can easily segment it into like, okay, this is a biology question, or this is a math question, or what have you, and like really decide what is irrelevant to your current question. And then you can just provide the context, ask your question, and you never need to retrain the model. So it's kind of like what Omar was saying around, you don't have to do the retrieval stuff. You can still do it to improve the model, but, and I posted about this yesterday, I feel like it's now getting to the point of how do we define AGI? Because if we don't come up with a definition, I think we're just going to keep moving the goalpost. And I would argue at some large enough token size window and a model that's high enough quality, especially given that the model can generate prompts that it feeds back into itself. So it could tell you what scripts to go run and what data to go collect using the particular scripts it generates. You go do that, it comes back, you feed it back into itself. And since the token window is not limiting it, it has really good memory. And it starts looking a lot like AGI.
Yeah, one of the things that I thought was really interesting about Sora is how they talked about how they use GPT-4 to generate a lot of the labels for the videos. So they had like a few words from humans, and they said, okay, basically, expand on this. And so that was kind of interesting how you can then start to, it's kind of like Tesla, what they did with auto labeling. You kind of jumpstart these models, and then the models can then be used to create training data and accelerate, the progress of the models. So, it's interesting. I think AGI does need a world model. It needs an understanding of the world. So they're trying to figure out how to do that. And I think it's really going to be important. Like a great LLM, like you kind of think about all these different sort of foundation models. So you got sort of a foundation model for language, vision, video, and they all just sort of kind of coalesce. So I could have a conversation with an LLM and talk about physics, and it should have some understanding of, you know, how the world works that it may be gained from watching a ton of videos.
Yeah, and I think that's been shown, right? Like, so early on when GPT first, GPT 1, 2, 3, when all these models came out, there were a lot of examples like asking it if somebody's holding a piece of paper and they let go of the paper with their left hand, what happens? And trying to see, like, does it understand what happens? And we're getting to now a point where a lot of these examples are getting solved, and it's difficult to know if it's because those are the examples we came up with at the time and it trained on it, or if it actually has a fundamental understanding of it. So it's getting more and more complex. But like part of the Gemini examples they showed was watching a 1 hour video and then asking it questions about like, somebody walking on the moon, like through via a drawing, and it kind of putting that all together and telling you that it's from this scene in the movie and it's the first step for mankind, kind of like that whole quote. That's a pretty telling thing. But what's interesting about both of these models is they're very computationally expensive. However, Gemini 1.5, they say that the model is cheaper to train than the previous version. And this is reminiscent of when the Palm 2 paper came out, and it showed that their smallest model, which was 7 billion parameters, outperformed the original Palm model, which was, I don't know, I forget now, like 60, some 30 or 60 billion parameters. So it's like the trend line is we're getting smaller models that are outperforming larger models on the order of 6 months to a year ago. So this pace of progress means that it's possible these models eventually get onto laptops, computers, or not super expensive data center APIs.
Yeah, I think they're going to be everywhere, really. And there'll be smaller versions you can run on your phone, on your laptop. I think the AI inference hardware is going to become kind of standard, the same way GPUs did, or maybe even to a greater extent. It's just incredible how general these models can be and how useful they can be for so many different tasks. So it really is sort of redefining the input method of our computers. You look at like the Vision Pro, and it's kind of useless without this really strong language functionality. When you don't have a keyboard and a mouse, I think an interface like that can work in the future. But these LLMs that can process language and text and video, they're really going to be at the center of making that experience work. So this is a pretty crazy time right now. We're basically seeing, computing as we know it be reinvented. And it's interesting. It does seem like OpenAI and Tesla are on more of a collision course than ever with this sort of video model they've released. Obviously, they're not competitors today. Tesla sells a car, OpenAI sells a API and a $20 a month chat GPT subscriptions. They're not competing at all today, but you kind of look at the direction both companies are headed, with Tesla with Optimus and robotics and an understanding of the world from video, and OpenAI also trying to build an understanding of the world from video. In their case, they're trying to generate video based on text rather than drive a car. But you can see really some of the similar thinking there between what Ashik talked about in terms of the foundation model for, world model, and what they're sort of looking at here. So I think they're increasingly going to be intersecting with each other and maybe even competing directly in the future. Like I could see OpenAI inevitably maybe working with somebody on a humanoid robot or maybe making their own humanoid robot or something like that. I mean, it definitely seems like they're kind of pointed in the same direction there. So it kind of makes sense why Elon's been kind of shitting on OpenAI a little bit, giving them a hard time, saying, oh, they were supposed to be open, they're supposed to be a nonprofit, because he's basically ended up creating a company that he's increasingly looking at suspiciously and saying, they're competing with us for talent. They're competing with us in ways where we may be actually trying to sell the same product one day in the not too distant future.
That's 100% accurate. If you look at video as input plus a language understanding, that's effectively what Optimus's brain is supposed to have. And now you have 3 to 4 companies competing over it. I would say Anthropic is about to kind of like maybe fall off. Claude hasn't really kept up, but the the brain
They
part
had a
is
good
really
five
hard.
second Super Bowl ad, though.
Yeah. I would argue C3 AI is doing something a little more pragmatic than they are, but it is what it is. There's a whole bunch of, you know, practicality here, which is, do you build the hardware and then you get it out there and you collect all that data and you solve it? Or now we're starting to see, okay, synthetic data is actually really good. It turns out you can sit there and you can dream about basketball and playing basketball and visualizing it. And then when you go on the court, you're going to actually outperform someone who only plays basketball on the court. So when you compare these two things, it's kind of like, okay, so synthetic data might not be perfect. In your dream, when you're playing basketball, it might be all like fuzzy and weird, and it's not like you don't have a perfect rendering. But the core things you're paying attention to in your dream is sufficient for what you're trying to learn in that dream. And the tolerance to bad data that transformers have is like a really big shift in, what people who were in the industry for a long time thought was possible. and people that are, now getting acclimated to it. It really is a very big move from how AI required really clean data sets to now it's like, oh, turns out training on synthetic data is not a big deal. So you can actually learn from yourself, and that's kind of what humans do, right? We learn from synthetic data. We run things through in our head, we simulate things, we think about how it's going to go, and then our physics may not be perfectly valid. Like, let's say you're picturing a sword fighting scene. Somebody may not properly think through how objects can't move through objects when they're thinking that through in their head. However, that thought process itself continued over time makes them better somehow. So it's a very strange thing, but I think we need to reassess how big of a moat real world data really is when it comes to large scale AIs.
Yeah, I mean, one way to think about it is essentially that the simulator is just getting really good, right? So whereas we had to architect this really complex video game rendering engine, today with generative AI, you can just kind of like boom, spit out this video that looks dead accurate. Like, you know, you really need to peep pixels to be able to see it. But so how much does the model sort of capture the strangeness of the real world? I think you could say today for sure it's probably not as good. You probably need a really good real world data set to train a model that captures all the weirdness of the real world in an accurate way. But yeah, I could see that moat continuing to get smaller over time as generative AI just takes off.
Yeah, if you have high fidelity simulation or the ability to just render the output that would have come from a simulation, which I would argue is basically high fidelity simulation, then you can really accelerate speed. So now, again, this brings us back to the original point. It's just a hardware thing. If you look at the OpenAI Sora paper, they actually show on one of the pages 3 videos of a dog playing with a lady, and it like blends into the lady and stuff in the first one, and then they 4x the compute, and it does pretty well, kind of at the level of most text to video was before the paper launch. And then uh, at 16x resolute or computational spend, it's operating at like real world looking like almost too perfect. That's the same complaint, right? Like the snow's not melting on the dog's face. That's the imperfections of the real world are now what we're seeking, not the perfections that would have been hard to render in the past. So what's to say that another 4x, bring that up to 64x, doesn't solve all those issues? There's nothing that we are seeing today on the scaling curve that makes me at least think this is not just a hardware issue. So as we continue to increase hardware, that's really what the battle here is. Who can make the most efficient hardware for transformers, and who can come up with the most effective and resource efficient ways of training and serving these models?
Yeah, exactly. And I think both sides are important, both the training and the inference. And they've both been very constrained by right now. But it does seem like in the long term, the model architecture is a commodity, right? These things don't tend to stay secret. People are very open about them. The data long term is a commodity. There's a ton of open data, more all the time. Synthetic data is getting better and better. So, what does it really come down to? Compute. And everybody's essentially using the same compute. So that's why you've seen kind of no real secret sauce in terms of pretty similar performance across these different models. But if you can have a foundational advantage in compute, let's say you're able to get compute for 50% less or something like that, that could really be a sustained advantage in being able to train a better model. So it really comes down to this compute war. So now it kind of makes sense when you think about Sam Altman raising money for an AI chip startup and throwing around money numbers like 7 trillion, what that really means.
Yeah, for context, the entire Silicon Valley uh, fabrication space is estimated to be about half a trillion.
Yeah. So This is why things like Dojo are really important and Google's TPUs, even if, as Elon says, hey, it may not work out, but it's really worth trying to do. Because if you can pull it off and actually have a sustained advantage in cost of training, then that's really going to be something that's difficult for someone else to replicate. So I think things like that are really important. That's why you're seeing Meta do it. You're seeing Microsoft get into making AI chips. Really, everybody and their mom. I mean, I've never seen a customer base like Nvidia's where they want to so badly dump Nvidia and their 70% margins, but they're just kind of locked in. And there's been a lot of discussion about this. Jim Keller's been like smack talking a little bit on X. He says CUDA is not a moat, it's a swamp. X86 was a swamp too, and we overcame it. So it definitely seems like there's a lot of energy, a lot of talent, a lot of capital being put into, you know, challenging the trillion-dollar elephant in the room, Nvidia. And their lead is only going to be, I think, eroded over time as more attention gets put into this field. But how quickly, I'm not sure. They are great competitors. So we'll have to see what happens. But I do think that we will have a greater variety of chips from different companies over time.
Yeah, I think I agree with this notion that CUDA is a swamp for what it's worth. Um, the other way to look at this is as language models get really good at adapting programming languages from one format to another and really refining how you write the languages, you can no longer claim programming languages as a moat. So CUDA as a moat, I don't buy it for that reason, in addition to many other reasons. And then the other part is when you come to hardware specialty, the key thing about the hardware specialty is if you go back to like the warehouse analogy we've used in the past, it's like you have like these bouncers with like counters standing in front of each of the rooms, and different amounts of each of the different kinds of rooms is being used. So let's say there's 10 flavors of rooms and people go to different genres of music and they're going in and out. Until you deploy these hardware ASICs into production and you put these bouncers out there to count how much traffic is going to each of these rooms, you don't really have a good sense of how much each of them is, like what the popularity of each of them is. So if the first room is 10 times as popular as the other 9, you want to allocate 10 times as many of those rooms on your hardware. That's how each iterative generation is usually getting better and better, because they can just look at the ratios of the popularity and they can reallocate the space on the chips properly. They can even move them closer to each other to like effectively shrink the paths that these music goers in this analogy are going to travel. So the big advantage, in my opinion, is whoever has the hardware lead with the most usage early on will continue to maintain that lead as long as they don't fumble.
All right. Is that it? Did you guys figure it out? So who's the winner? Who should we invest in?
I'm not going to say who we should invest in or who the winner is, but
Oh, after all that,
I will say this.
there's
I'll say
no
it very.
punchline. This is like a
Okay, hold on.
joke
I'll say
that
it. I'll say
goes
it.
on and on and on without a punchline. Machine,
Here.
what's the punchline?
I don't
Meta,
think there
you're
is a
done. You're
winner.
Meta. You've had the stage for half hour. Did not deliver a punchline. So, machine, what's your punchline?
I don't have a punchline. I just want to know if Meta finally quit his bet. Has he given up your bet against me on L4?
Why would I have given up? That's such a silly question. We're closer, not further from the last time you asked.
We're gonna get a question from Tesla Yoda, and then I'm gonna force you guys to a punchline. Yoda, go ahead.
Yeah, I was wondering if you guys are also looking at TSMC. They make obviously the chip for Nvidia, AMD, the Apple Silicon, etc. Just thoughts from the panel.
I think TSMC is the only company with a moat at this time because they have managed to keep a really good trade secret of how they have 3 to 5 nanometers of precision in their chipset design. And the closest competitor is Intel. And I think they're targeting 5 to 7. And they still don't have that because they actually are closer to 12 to 14 right now. So it's like not even close in terms of competition. If folks want to like pressure TSMC, they couldn't. But what's strange is TSMC is keeping their prices pretty low given the moat that they have. So I think there's non-capitalistic reasons why that's happening.
Yeah, I think their margins is around just above 50%, usually 50 to 55 is their margins. And Intel is also their customer actually, especially at the advanced nodes. So yeah, just wanted to share that.
Meta, Nvidia, buy, hold, or sell?
Me personally, I would sell.
Okay, Omar?
Hold.
Okay. Machine or Yoda, if you guys want to opine, you may, on Nvidia, buy, hold, or sell.
I think it's a hold.
Nvidia would be buy for me because of the impending, I think the split. Although the again, TSM has I think a multiple of 25 right now, so feels like it's more attractive.
Okay, so we have on Nvidia, we have one buy from Yoda, one sell from Meta, and 2 holds from Omar and Machine. So let's start with Meta. So Yoda said his reason for a buy is impending split. So he's, maybe forecasting a rush into the stock leading into a stock split. Meta, what's your, say 30-second, 60-second, 1-2 sentence summary, executive summary for your why to sell?
If we're looking at a 1 year plus horizon, I don't think their margins will sustain. And then based on their current pricing, I don't think the market's expecting that.
Omar, do you think Nvidia's margins will sustain in the next year or two?
Well, to be honest, I have no clue, but I think they probably will, for the most part, hold up.
And I think Machine thinks so too. He said in earlier spaces that orders and demand for the H100s should sustain for the next year or two. Right, Machine?
Yeah, I think so. But even if they don't, I guess where my head is that I think even if margins decrease, the amount that they would decrease would be compensated by the increase in revenue because they're growing revenue still. That overall operating income would still be flat, if not still going up a bit. And if you look at their valuation on their last quarter, then they're not really um, that super highly valued if that was just extrapolated out for 4 quarters. That's why I'm hold though, because I'm not sure that the margins are going to sustain, and then there before it be a buy. I'm going to wait and see what I read on and listen to the next earnings, and see where things are then to kind of update my thoughts.
So I've been listening to a lot of talk on Nvidia going into this earnings release this week. It is a hot stock. And I think the market consensus is what Machine just said, which is even if their margins don't sustain, their top line is going to grow, so operating income might grow or stay stable, etc. The question is, does that justify 100 PE? And yes, the historical PE, etc. If you annualize last quarter, etc., it might be lower, but still, it's 100 PE.
But it's a lot lower. It's like 40 or under.
Do you think 40 is reasonable for a stagnant operating income?
I don't know. Why don't you ask Tesla if a 60 is reasonable?
Yeah, but Tesla has obviously, as you know, megapacks, factories ramping on 2 continents. We have Optimus project that's going to change labor as we know it. We have robotaxis on the horizon, Cybertruck production ramping, and only Elon knows what else. What does Nvidia have beyond H100s?
No, I agree. There is a much bigger long-term potential with Tesla over many years in the future. Um, in the nearer term, for the next year or two, those things, even Cybertruck or Megapacks, aren't going to fundamentally change their operating margins in revenue so much where they can really be super highly valued. So it's really going to come down to perceptions of FSD and Optimus changing their valuation. So I mean, I agree with that. Nvidia has more limited scope, and so it's going to be more sensitive to, the market reaction to margins, current margins on their H100s and whatnot. And if those go down, the stock will suffer more likely than Tesla would when their margins went down.
The stock's got a trailing PE of 95, but the forward PE is 35. And if they keep growing, it's going to continue to look even cheaper. So, you know, I, you know, of course they've got this huge lead. It's probably only going to erode over time. I would be very shocked to see them actually take more share of the market over time. Everybody wants to get away from them. They hate that they're spending, 70% margins for Nvidia on these products. But you look at this business, they're going to sell 2 million of these things in the next year, these DGX H100s. They cost $40,000. So this thing costs almost as much as a Tesla. They're going to sell as many of them as Tesla sells. And instead of the margin being 16%, it's 70%, right? I mean, that's a really great business. Sure, people may be trying to get away, but the big customers are Google Cloud, Amazon AWS, and Microsoft Azure. These are big ships. They don't just change, they don't just cancel their Netflix subscription, cancel their Nvidia because, they got too drunk last night and spent too much money. These are like, budgets that they've set in advance. They got customers who are depending on them to do this capital outlay. They're going to buy it, right? Any sort of change in the market is going to be at least at a 3 to 5 year time horizon, really. Um, there's a lot of inertia here. And you know what? People are just like, the stock just has momentum. When people just see it shooting up, you know how people get. Things can get a little irrational, right? So, whatever a rational investor thinks, it can go a little bit higher than that. Like if you had told me, and I was super bullish about Tesla in 2018, what's the highest you think the market cap could go? I wouldn't have suggested $1 trillion, but it went well over $1 trillion. So, things can get a little bit nutty. People just see everyone else making money. They want to pile in. That's not necessarily the best time to jump in when it's shooting up. You can get burned. Eventually there's going to be a correction, but you know, would I tell someone to sell it? It's easy to look at it and say, oh my God, it's overvalued, sell it. But people told me that when it was like 200, 300, 400. And I almost listened to them, but I'm glad I didn't because, it's just going up. And when you're riding a rocket ship, don't let go in the market. There will be a moment when it sort of corrects, and then maybe I'll, trim my position a little bit. But I'm not sure when that day will be. It could be this week with earnings. It could be next quarter. It could be in 4 quarters. Who knows?
Two good replies in X. So if you want to participate in the discussion, you may either request to speak or you can leave a reply either on X or on YouTube live chat. The link to which is at the top of your screens. YouTube live hours help me get to watch hours requirement. First good reply. I missed the key player in NVIDIA. A perfect squirrel says NVIDIA has Pelosi. So that's a really good point. And then the second good reply, Blue Skies 123 says, after H100s, NVIDIA has HGX H200. NVIDIA is introducing a new top-of-the-line chip for AI work, the HGX H200. The new GPU upgrades the wildly in-demand H100 with 1.4 times more memory bandwidth and 1.8 times more memory capacity, improving its ability to handle intensive generative AI work. Has anyone ever seen a table that compares NVIDIA's current product, future product, versus what others have said they're going to put out in the next couple of years? I would be interested in that table. If you have, please reply to the space with that table.
I mean, it's weird. It's almost not really about that. Like, you could get an AMD GPU and it can kind of do the same thing. But Nvidia is just sort of the gold standard. They've been doing this for years, right? You saw them donate the first DGX computer to OpenAI back in 2016. They've just been investing in this in a long time, whereas others are now just sort of looking at it and going, "Oh shit, this is actually a really important market." So, you know, there's a lot of chips out there with pretty similar capabilities, but it's everything. It's the hardware, it's the software, it's the APIs, right? A lot of people, I mean, GPU programming is kind of esoteric. People know how to program a CPU, but programming a GPU, people are kind of like, huh? Like, most people do not know how to write CUDA code. CUDA is like this very sort of esoteric thing. You're mostly just relying on a CUDA module that somebody wrote, right? And your average sort of GPU user, if you're just running some training job in PyTorch or something like that, you probably don't know anything about CUDA or the implementation details of the kernel. You just know that, okay, this is my setup and it works with the NVIDIA GPU. So it's a really interesting situation.
Yoda and a machine.
Yeah, the other reason for uh, a buy for me is yeah, Jensen. So he is a master storyteller. Um, you know, he uh, you know, I'm all in on Tesla, of course. So, but that's actually one difference between sort of him and Elon. He may be lesser of an engineer, and maybe by far, but from a investor relations perspective, and storytelling perspective, he's probably stronger. And so yeah, that's definitely not something to underestimate as well.
Thank you. Um, Jensen founded NVIDIA, is that correct?
Yeah, correct. And it should be worth noting that uh, it's about the ecosystem. So Jensen has relationship with the founders, Morris Chan of TSMC, uh, and it is the grip hold on that capacity on TSMC's side, as well as on the material supply side with Japanese raw material suppliers, and then uh, that actually creates the moat. It's not pure just sort of the science or the engineering side. There's a whole supply chain ecosystem, obviously, um, and so that is very difficult for even the Intels of the world to break. A good case in point is China has a lot of chip design firms that are trying to replicate what TSMC has done, but has failed because they don't have the same relationships with the supply chain. You know, so for those reasons, why again, NVIDIA would be very very difficult to replicate. Have you guys noticed they're all Taiwanese? So Jensen, AMD, the CEO is also Taiwanese. TSMC, of course. So there's definitely an ecosystem there.
Interesting point. Thank you very much, Yoda. That's very valuable. Machine, did you have your hand up earlier? How are you going to follow that?
Yeah, well, I was just going to make the analogy that when you compare Nvidia's ecosystem to others, it's kind of like imagining that you had uh, two male escorts. One is you, Yaman, and the other is me. And you could argue that they both have the same hardware and they could work good enough in your case. But really, the end user still knows that if they go with the superior male escort, me, that everything's going to be taken care of. They can just sit back and relax and know that they will be pleased. And in your case, they would have to be really concerned and make sure, is he going to do it right? Do I have to get involved? How much effort do I have to put in? And so people will pay a premium for the superior experience, in my experience.
You know, I was looking at more audience data over the weekend, specifically looking at demographics of my audience. And I was wondering, why is it so slanted to one side, one gender? And I think you reminded me today why that is.
I apologize to your female listeners. That was all a joke. I have never been a male escort. Yaman, I cannot speak for.
Well, I mean, Yoda made a really good point. Why NVIDIA enjoys such a amazing, um, you know, ecosystem in the supply chain. It's not just about the engineering, but the supply chain ecosystem. So it would make it even harder for AMD or others to catch up to NVIDIA. So then, Yoda, I guess the question, a natural question for you is then why are you 100% invested in Tesla if you're so impressed by Jensen and you believe that the stock is undervalued and they will continue um, to dominate?
Yeah, I should say that I think I'm about 95% on Tesla in the portfolio. I've been divesting Apple, which was a part of the portfolio, into TSMC. And I was holding Nvidia, but unfortunately that was prior to I had a position that I sold prior to ChatGPT moment in late 2022. And so for me, right now it's about shifting uh, Apple into TSMC and Nvidia. Um, the Again, it's just that the Nvidia currently has a higher value, higher P ratio, post 2022 versus TSM, and so TSM is sort of I guess a more of a hedge bet, because every AI chip has to go through them in terms of the advanced node AI chips. But of course, I would love to have held on to more NVIDIA.
Machine?
I don't know. You were just talking in circles there, Tesla Yoda. I mean, I don't know. You're making excuses about Apple selling your Apple. Maybe you'll convert it into Nvidia. I don't know. I understand that. We know the real reason why you're mostly invested in Tesla. It's just because your username is Tesla Yoda and you don't want to change it to Nvidia Yoda because it sounds even more stupid.
Oh my gosh. All right.
That's okay. I'll take that one.
um, Yoda, what do you expect from Wednesday from NVIDIA's earnings?
I think Jensen is gonna say uh, that the market is exploded and they cannot see the end of demand. Maybe very similar to what Elon talks about, kind of the next gen vehicle demand, that it's essentially unlimited. I think a figure that AMD has been thrown out there is it's about a $400 billion TAM. But for the most part, no single company can address that in the short term because it's supply uh, capacity constraint. So it's really a moot point. It's really for them to share that outlook that basically demand is essentially unlimited in the short term. And he always talks about how essentially um, the industry is trying to convert to accelerated computing, and so all the data centers are converting to accelerated computing. Uh, yeah, so it's really supply and manufacturing capacity constraint would be the story, I think.
Gotcha. Thank you. I'm going to pin at the top a post by the AI investor. The AI investor says, Omar, I'm going to ask you about this one. Fun fact, NVIDIA is projected to sell 2 million H100s in 2024, close to the number of cars that Tesla would sell in the same year. NVIDIA sells H100 for $30,000 to $40,000 with gross profit on each of $21,000 to $28,000. Tesla sells cars for $46,000 with a gross profit of $9,000. The crazy part about NVIDIA gross margin, NVIDIA doesn't even manufacture the chip. Another crazy part, there's no limit to the demand of H100s while demand for cars is limited. Do you agree with the statement that there's no limit to the demand of training chips?
Well, of course not. There's a limit to everything.
Yeah, that's what I thought too. Yoda, what do you think? Do you think there's a limit to training chips and then specifically for H100s? And if there is, like Omar says, and I think so too, how far is that?
Yeah, I think in the short term there's no limit again, just more from a capacity of manufacturing perspective. But in terms of the IP, eventually these things do get copied because people move around companies. And again, I don't want to not mention this part, which is TSMC, when they work with their customers, they actually help them with solutioning. And so some of this IP is actually residing with TSMC. And so how they uh, intentionally or unintentionally or through osmosis share that with AMD, uh, and other companies. Of course, they don't do that explicitly, but how those kind of knowledge gets shared uh, eventually, I think is a risk. So the only thing you could trust is that Nvidia, I believe, is one of those companies, much like Tesla, that is always innovating and views that innovation is ultimately the real moat, not patents, etc. So I do think that NVIDIA, as they have with all the various platforms that they've done throughout the last couple decades, they'll continue to do that under Jensen's leadership.
Omar?
Yeah, so I'm just some additional thoughts on the Nvidia and Tesla comparison. So it is definitely really striking today, but you think about a situation that could arise in the next couple of years where the average car in the fleet can generate, let's say, $300,000 in gross profit over its lifetime, and that's split, 50-50 between the fleet owner and the Tesla company. The equation could look very different. Whereas when you look at compute, you've never in the history of the microprocessor seen a situation where a chip just stays really expensive. It's always gotten to the point where you get more transistors for less money, you get more performance, and you pay less for it. It always just sort of goes in one direction of this type of compute just being commoditized. So that's kind of what I see. Right now, they've got this huge mode. It's become this hot thing. There's this huge surge of interest. But over time, I think it's going to be just as much of a commodity as an ARM CPU is today. So, how they really survive in that environment or what the future looks like, um, you know, I, I'm not sure they're going to be able to sell it at the price of a car forever. There is a point where, maybe you have enough compute really, or you say, okay, well, we found ways to use this compute much more efficiently. Now we don't need to scale as quickly, that type of thing. These type of economies like tend to emerge when you have something that you're spending billions of dollars on. People get creative and look at ways to use it more efficiently or ways to not use it or so on and so forth. So I think probably over time I'd rather invest in Tesla's business. They, I think, post autonomy have a car that essentially is 10 times as valuable. It costs them the same to manufacture, but the value they pull in terms of earnings they generate over the car's lifetime is, I don't know, maybe 5 to 10 times what it was before or more. And there's no end to it, right? You just get a cut of all the revenue on the fleet. And I think demand there probably scales a lot more sort of smoothly than chip demand, just because you need physical cars out there serving physical demand in the world, and it's a big planet. Whereas, I could see us getting to some point where we don't need, explosive growth in training compute. We have a large amount of training compute already built up and techniques that render it sort of sufficient and not as much of a pressing, urgent shortage situation as it's been recently.
Okay. So you guys are, both neutral to bullish on Nvidia in the next year or two. What would change your minds? Hearing what on Wednesday would, or seeing what on Wednesday would change your mind?
Well, if they came out and said, we expect our DGX H100 sales to decline, then that would be a bad sign. But they're not going to say that.
Yoda?
Yeah, I think NVIDIA has tried to expand, and I think if they were to go into hardware, I would be on the sell side. So, for example, if they were to all of a sudden announce that they want to build a car, or build bots, that would be a sign because manufacturing, they don't manufacture their chips. So manufacturing is never their forte. And so you've got Tesla uh, coming towards AI through the advantage of being the best at manufacturing, cars and bots. Whereas you've got Nvidia coming towards AI uh, from the angle of chip design. Um, and so I think each of them have to be very careful. Like Tesla, going into chip design and manufacturing as an example, got to be very careful with the Dojo program that they're not going out of their circle of competence, um, too quickly, right? Because you could spend obviously uh, billions and billions very quickly, probably trillions if you're OpenAI. So yeah, that would be the warnings.
It's also interesting that Nvidia invested in other publicly traded companies. On Wednesday, Nvidia disclosed in a regulatory filing that it has stakes in a handful of public companies: ARM, SoundHound AI, Recursion Pharmaceuticals, NanoX Imaging, and Too Simple. Yoda, does that concern you at all that Nvidia is, maybe instead of investing more into R&D or capex or buying back its own stock, it's, becoming a holding company sort of?
Um, no, I think Tesla has acquired like sort of technology companies that had unique foundational research to offer or to accelerate those research areas. So if NVIDIA is kind of strategically picking off these technology companies, then that's fine. Where the red herring is you know acquiring like a figure.ai or like a complete completely different field that they're going in. But if they're buying foundational research based companies and getting the IP, that's a good thing.
Yeah, and I should also note that the size of these investments is only a couple of $1 million, which is interesting. Why would a true $1 trillion company um, even bother with a $380,000 investment into NanoX? Anyway, well, I'm really interested in this company just because I find it fascinating. As Omar mentions, their gross margins are insanely high, and almost every single customer hates that they're reliant on Nvidia. That there's no everybody's kind of working together to find an alternative to Nvidia, and yet the stock keeps pushing higher, and the retail investors, really chasing the stock. But we'll see. We'll see what that means on Wednesday. Omar said he would change his mind if this management came out and said the demand is declining. But with 100 PE, even if your growth slows down, it doesn't have to turn down. The stock could go down, right, Omar?
Yeah, of course. But I mean, the thing is, they keep putting out estimates that make the old multiples look cheap by comparison. So you're right. The market does have an expectation for explosive growth. If they deliver even okay growth, right? It doesn't have to be a decline. But even if they said, "Hey, we grew 6%," right? Great growth for a lot of businesses, the market would say, "Oh my God, 6%, that's horrible," right? So, yeah, expectations are for explosive growth, but the thing is, they have actually been delivering explosive growth. So, as long as that continues, the market will be happy. But yeah, if they have even, lukewarm growth, that would be a big failure.
On YouTube Live, I concluded the poll for Cybertruck, published the results there. I'm going to start another poll, NVIDIA buy, hold, or sell. If you'd like to vote on it, the link is at the top of your screens. Most people listen, participate on X, but keep YouTube Live open and muted just to support the YouTube channel for watch hours requirement for monetization. And I really thank those folks. Machine, go ahead.
I think you would just imagine in a year from now what Nvidia's earnings are and kind of what their growth trajectory is, and then imagine what forward PE ratio would be reasonable to apply to them, and just back that up and say what's a fair stock market share price valuation for them. And we obviously don't know that. People will try to model it, but I would argue pretty confidently that their earnings per share, operating income quarterly is going to be higher than it is right now. And if you apply even a forward PE ratio of 30, that you're likely still going to end up with a share price higher than current. I don't think that necessarily means it's going to double, but I do think it probably means that the um, bottom, like how low it could go from here, is probably somewhat limited.
Dude, I got kicked out of my own YouTube Live on YouTube. How does that even happen?
Probably Ellie probably banned you like it did me.
This is so weird. Anyway, I'll figure that out. Is your daughter sick, Machine? Are you not taking care of your daughter?
She's just, I don't know, she's on a play date and I'm picking her up. And I don't know if they just didn't give her any water, but she's just absolutely downing water from one of my Camelback water bottles and probably aspirating.
All right. Any questions, comments? Please request to speak. I'm going to bring up Teslascope if we're done with NVIDIA talk, and we can talk some V12 while I
By
figure
the
this
way,
thing to go.
Rivian R1S, great looking vehicle. Great looking vehicle. Much better than the Model X.
Teslascope, would you like to tell us about the software issue?
Yeah, so last night it looks like there was some type of misconfiguration with the release notes. And I say last night because I started getting messages around 11 p.m., I'd say. And I think Omar and a couple others got a couple other messages this morning. But essentially, what happened was every time that there is any release notes that go out to any vehicle, Tesla has two parameters basically that they check. They check the vehicle configuration and they use that to determine which release notes to show, if there's specific features that are only intended for that configuration. And they also essentially go, okay, they have a list of every single update that has come out relevant to that branch, and it has a little toggle, a boolean, a true or false, that says, should we show these release notes and include them in relation to the release to the update that they're now receiving or just received? So it looks like there was a mishap or some other misconfiguration that happened where the vehicles that have just been delivered, so all vehicles, I'd say in the last 2 weeks, I think just Model Y, S, and X's, I don't believe Highlands at this point, um, essentially had received incorrect release notes where while the release notes actually say that full self-driving version 12.1.2 was available for their vehicle, it actually isn't. When you go to the software tab, it will still show as full self-driving 11.4.9. I even had someone reboot their vehicle just in case, and then one other person this morning finally replied and said like they drove and their experience didn't seem any different. Like it wasn't doing any of the new features that we've seen in a lot of Omar's videos. So it just looks like it was a technical mishap, which it's a little frustrating, sad for many. But I would say, and I know that Omar has agreed based on a lot of their tweets, is that we should hopefully be seeing something very soon. Just little mishaps like this show that they're very close to getting ready for this. This has only happened like one other time in my memory, unrelated to full self driving, where there was a erroneous feature, but that's kind of the gist of it.
Thank you, Teslascope. Any updates on V12.2.1? When do you expect it to go wide release?
It should honestly be any time between the next few days to I'd say about a week or so from now. In the best case scenario, I've gotten a little bit more feedback from employees. A lot of the sources that I speak to have hardware for vehicles, so they hadn't been able to test the 12.1 or 12.2 initially. But now that they've gotten 12.2.1 on their vehicles, feedback's pretty much been very positive so far. I also have I don't know if this has been confirmed yet, even by Greenly Only, but I spoke to a engineer just last night, and they essentially said that the actual highway stack is still using solely the V11 stack, which is internally called Rodeo. It actually isn't using any of the end-to-end endpoints yet. There was even when Tesla re-releases 11.4.9, there are little changes and little tweaks that are made that keep it on the same version. So some improvements can be felt, but it won't. It's essentially based on Green's tweets. The first end-to-end kind of little previews we've been seeing of it actually affecting the other stacks have been in the 2024 branches. And Tesla is testing and currently working on an end-to-end for highway, but they're having some issues with kind of getting the transition to work perfectly. So that's the current focus and why some of the experiences don't seem to be a little bit as on par as the city streets driving.
Yeah, I don't agree with that. I think that it's really clear from driving it on the highway that it's the new N10 stack. And we've got a car here with 11 and with 12. So we've driven them both. The way it makes lane changes, even some of the regressions, it's clearly sort of the N10 stack. And you don't see any moment of transition or anything like that. So I would be very, very surprised if it was the old stack. The and I know what 11 feels like. I've tried every version. This is doing maneuvers that we're seeing elsewhere in the N10 stack, especially the lane changes and things like that. It's very noticeable the way it merges onto the highways. So I would definitely say, based on my experience, and of course, this is just sort of anecdotal, it feels like it's the N10 stack for sure. The one thing that I do notice is that the auto set speed doesn't work on the highways. It goes back to allowing you to set your own speed, as you can do on the city streets as well. But other than that, it's pretty much the same experience. And overall, I think it's done pretty great on the highways with the V12 stack.
Machine, no hands mode.
Apologize if I misheard, but I thought I just heard Omar say he knows what 11 inches feels like. Can you elaborate?
I say he's very deeply invested in version 12 right now.
Machine, how do you feel about making things awkward for 400 people at the same time?
How do I feel about? I'm sorry, I missed that. I was admiring my own joke.
Anyway, I fixed the YouTube live chat function, and the link is at the top of your screens. Hollis, go ahead. Hollis Ann, you may unmute yourself and go ahead. All right, we can't hear Hollis. All right. Next item. We talked about Nvidia. We compared Nvidia to Tesla, valuation, technology, moat. That was a really interesting conversation. Thank you to those participated. Nvidia is going to announce on Wednesday. We also have Rivian and Lucid reports. Not sure if I'm going to talk about those, but Omar, any change in your view of either company, Rivian or Lucid, at this time?
No, I'm excited to see what their earnings hold, but it's going to be the same day as Nvidia, so Nvidia will probably overshadow it.
Machine.
Aren't you forgetting another company's earnings reports that's even more important?
What is it?
Arguably the most influential EV maker. Not Rivian.
VinFast?
Vinfast, that's right.
Are you short still?
I am not, although I'm thinking, of course, about entering again a little bit. Um, we'll see. I can't imagine the earnings report is going to be good. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. Okay.
I am interested in Rivian's earnings report to see all their proclamations about cost reductions. Um, mostly going to be happening later this year, but kind of warning the market. Last earnings report about selling less of their um, electric vans, and I believe those being the highest margin products currently. So I may expect their earnings to come in worse than people are expecting, and their cash flow and such not being in the best shape. So I'll be curious to see.
All right. Let me just quickly look at the stocks. Rivian, $15 billion. Rivian, $15 billion over the past 6 months, down 23%. It's very close to the all-time lows. And now Lucid, $8.5 billion. Or is it true that the CEO got another big pay package, like a bonus?
Thought it was like
You're
$6
not
million
Omar.
or
Your name
something.
is not Omar. Omar?
Listen, you should be lucky to have such an influential social media personality on here. Me, not Omar. This guy even hides behind a fake name, Whole Mars. Yeah, we get it. It rhymes with Omar. Okay, real creative.
I actually never thought about that.
Something happened to his connection. Who knows what happened?
I know the whole Mars blog is, I think, a reference to something that Steve Jobs had said, but that's about it, I think.
All right.
I'll blame myself for the connection. I sent him a messages through iMessage, and he disconnected like shortly after.
Any news on your front, Teslascope?
Just a lot of internal testing going on with a couple different campaigns. Tesla just days ago started to hire for the first time engineers for full self-driving beta in China. I haven't heard of anyone get hired yet, but the job openings just went up. Still a lot of work going on across the entire globe with full self-driving. But that's pretty much it. Still anticipating for hopefully the latest build of full self-driving version 12 to go out to customers relatively soon. Possibly, very, very hopefully this week.
Thank you. Any questions from listeners? Please request to speak. One interesting take, maybe Tesla Yoda could opine on this if he's available. Dare Obasanjo says generative AI today. This was reposted by Omar earlier. He says generative AI today is where self-driving cars were in 2015. Lots of impressive announcements by big tech, and starts up with the idea that machines replacing humans was a few years away. In reality, instead of being close to done, a decade later we realize now we'd barely started. Tesla Yoda, do you agree with that statement? That generative AI is a decade away from a material impact in the world?
Generative AI, like the LLM ChatGPT stuff, or
Well, the person, I'll pin it at the top, the post by Dare Obasanjo. Generative AI today is well self-driving cars were in 2015. Lots of impressive announcements. But a decade later, we realize now we'd barely started instead of being close to done. Like if you kind of think, if you kind of think about it, back in 2016, when Elon said by the end of 2016, we're going to have, FSD, or by the end of 2017, it's going to have coast to coast drives. And yet, it's 2024 and still hasn't happened. Do you think the same proclamations about generative AI today, kind of replacing screenwriting or filmmaking, or AGI being a couple years away, do you think those predictions will similarly prove too optimistic by a decade?
no? I think the generative AI arrow has been shot and it's not coming back. There will be, stages, uh, you know, in terms of text, text to video, etc., that will build on top of the prior wave. But I think the generative AI arrow's not coming back. We are well on the start of the S curve. There's no turning back. I think full self-driving was a tougher problem because it is multi-dimensional. Text is, you might argue that obviously language is very complicated, but the output is, I think, in a less complex dimension than, let's say, a car, driving, or a robot roaming around the streets. There are physics to deal with. There are, sort of different physical edge cases. The risk of failing is higher, and so the techniques are maybe more reserved to begin with. But yeah, I think the problem was just a tougher one.
Got it. Thank you. Let's bring Sawyer in if he's available to speak and maybe talk about Q1 production and deliveries. Quite a wide range of estimates right now. Sawyer, how are you, first of all?
Doing good. Happy Monday.
Any favorite news of the day?
Not really.
Not really. Slow news day. Stock market
Very,
closed.
yeah, very slow.
Well, I'm asking people to, say their favorite president today. Do you have a favorite president?
Favorite president? Probably Abraham Lincoln.
Abraham Lincoln. Why is that?
I just think he had such a lasting impact on sort of our democracy and our shape as a country.
All
And
right.
yeah,
Great answer. So Troy, let's go to Q1 production deliveries. Troy says that he estimates 470,000, but this estimate is about 2 days, 1 day old from his post. 470,000, and his estimate as of January 28th was 479,000. So he lowered his estimate for Q1 deliveries by 9,000.
hmm
And he says the analyst consensus is 479,000, down from 484,000 in January 28th. Troy believes that Tesla is still struggling with the Model 3 Highland production ramp at Fremont. Do you expect Q1 results production deliveries to miss estimates?
yes, I think they're all too high. I think they should all be lower.
And what do you think will be the impact on the stock?
I mean, sentiment's pretty bad right now. I mean, Tesla really gave no guidance, so now it's just really up to analysts and everyone else to sort of come up with what they think the year will look like. So that leaves a lot more speculation. But in general, it doesn't seem like people are very confident in growth this year. I think a lot of it is probably priced into the stock right now. Um, but it does seem like, with the Model 3 ramp at Fremont, it's a lot of people put off their deliveries in the U.S. at least to wait for when the EV point of sale rebate went live. Um, so, and obviously Tesla's still playing around with prices. It seems like, and they've been trying a lot of different initiatives to try to encourage people to take delivery sooner. So, Q1 is historically the weakest quarter of the year. It's wintertime. So I don't really expect strong numbers this quarter.
All right. I see you posted that Rivian, Lucid, and Nvidia are going to announce earnings on Wednesday. Which company do you think will get the most attention?
Oh, Nvidia. I mean, it's the king of the market right now, right? I mean, Lucid to me is probably the most interesting just because their numbers are so bad for Q4 deliveries, down 10% year over year. Q4 production was down 31% year over year. But yeah, Nvidia will definitely take the spotlight.
Their CEO just got a big bonus, right?
Yeah, they gave him a $6 million cash bonus for unveiling the Lucid Gravity prototype.
I would have unveiled it for half the price. That's amazing. I saw somebody reply to that post and say, I'm going to buy a couple of shares and sue the company.
I know, it's a lot of jokes like that these days.
Yeah, it's amazing. Kind of makes you wonder. I mean, the company's obviously is a flop, and the products are a flop too. Kind of makes you wonder how, like, what's going on behind the scenes that they're giving them so much money.
Well, and on top of that, they just cut prices up by up to 10%. So if they don't see any incremental volume growth, then I mean their future just doesn't look good. I don't think the Lucid Gravity is coming soon enough for them for it to fix all this.
Yeah. Tesla Yoda or Tesla Scope? Either of you have any comments on Lucid?
I tend to look at Lucid mostly positively. I think it doesn't have as much potential in a lot of regards as Rivian, as kind of the breakaway company for a new EV. I have someone who just took delivery of one recently, so I, similar to just the Tesco service, I'm working on adding support for Rivian and Lucid vehicles as well, very slowly. I like to support any company that tries to put at least some effort into making a quality EV that isn't built on the same kind of ancient frameworks as a lot of the other OEMs. I think their earnings might be interesting. I don't expect too many deliveries, and we'll kind of see how things go from there.
All right. Sawyer, I also saw another post I didn't get a chance to read. IF Metal, if Metal's Tesla Sweden strike leads to 20 workers losing jobs. Would you like to give us a summary overview of the article?
Yeah, essentially IF Metal convinced Hydro Extrusions, I guess, to participate in the fight against Tesla through the strike, and 20 of those Hydro employees have now lost their job. The irony in all this is, IF is trying to save jobs and prevent a lot of this from happening, but as a result of the strike, that because of them, people are losing their jobs. So I don't know if we'll see more job losses or not, but the strike in Sweden continues to press forward.
So how did these workers lose their jobs? The company laid them off, and in that case, are there no repercussions against laying off employees that are on strike?
Yeah, I don't know about repercussions. I'd have to look into that. But it sounds like there wasn't really a good reason for the reason they lost their jobs.
Yeah, it sounds like a mess. Sounds like a mess. And I mean that's a good transition to also Sean Fain threatening the Ford CEO again, for the company actually, threatened to shut down the Kentucky plant. I'm sure you saw about that. My understanding is that each region needs to have their own agreement on top of the national agreement that UAW reached with legacy automakers back in November. And apparently, there's a clause in the Kentucky plant one that they can shut down the plant based on health and safety reasons. And in the past, UAW has used that clause to negotiate other items that have nothing to do with health and safety reasons. This is according to Autoline Daily. So it's possible that later this week, the Kentucky truck plants of Ford can go on strike.
I you really got to feel for Jim Farley and all these other CEOs because the UAW is really a thorn in their behind. I mean, I think based off the response and the performance of their most recent strike against the major three automakers in Detroit, that Sean Fain probably feels like we have more control maybe than we did before. And now that especially Ford and GM are starting to pull back on some of their big EV investments, I think Sean maybe sees that as an avenue of okay, maybe we can get more of what we want, and maybe to make some more threats, or otherwise, they'll retaliate in some way. I don't know.
Right. And then I see another news on your page. Tesla Giga Berlin proposed expansion divides residents but sees youth sports. Would you like to give us a few sentences on that one?
Yeah, this has been going on a while. Sort of one of the last steps to getting approval for Giga Berlin expansion is to get local approval and input. And it seems like a lot of the younger people around the area are like, yes, this is good for the environment. Um, any potential more local things that are negative for the environment, the positives far outweigh the negatives here. Whereas I think the more older people are like more focused on more of the local impacts and more short-term thinking. And I don't think they fully realize the positive impact a factory expansion like this would have. It brings a lot of jobs to the area. It brings out supply chain because Tesla likes to localize their supply chains to where their factories are. Um, I don't, yeah, it makes you wonder why aren't they getting it, the older people.
Yeah. And then another one that I really liked on Sawyer's page is refreshed Tesla Model 3 has won the 2024 Drive Car of the Year, Best Urban Electric Vehicle under $100,000. And a quote that Sawyer highlighted, it's now much more comfortable thanks to softer suspension and seats. Plus, it's now complete with a nicer feeling interior.
Yeah, the new 3 just builds off of what the old 3 had, which was an award-winning design and interior, and then just made it better, trickling down a lot of the Model S features into the new 3. So, and I suspect we'll see the same with whenever we get a refreshed Y, and that'll get a bunch of awards as well.
Tesla Yoda?
Yeah, I just drove the Highland. I had it overnight actually. They loaned it to me for like a photo shoot. Um, and I have the original 3 from just a year ago. And I would say if you are an existing Model 3 owner of the previous generation, you don't feel too bad. You know, I felt like the experience was incrementally better, but not like a huge step change that you need to rush out to trade it in or something. Um, the FSD is based on, or yeah, it's based on hardware 4, and I could notice just a slight, I shouldn't say slight, a noticeable improvement. The way it sees in the dark, the way it navigates winding roads is just a slightly more human experience than my own Model 3. So yeah, it's definitely if you're looking for a Model 3 uh, or EV, this is a great car to get. But if you're an existing owner, you know, don't feel too bad.
Thank you, Tesla Yoda. If anyone has test driven the Model 3 Highland, you're welcome to request to speak and share your experience. We'd love to hear from you. Tesla Yoda, question for you on FSD. What excites you the most with respect to FSD? FSD as ADAS in the next year or two? FSD as robotaxis beyond that? Or FSD as foundational model for Optimus?
Yeah, I think as a daily driver, the ADAS capability alone is value adding. The fact that I am much more relaxed on stop and go traffic or even a highway type scenario, that has value. As an investor, the robotaxi scenario is what I'm looking forward to. Uh, but actually, my son is learning how to drive, and for me, whether it's ADAS or the fact that he could have that support of extra eyes, the actuators, that is very valuable. So I think for kind of parents and people that have kids that are learning how to drive, knowing that the Tesla platform is going to bring that extra layer of safety is a huge selling factor.
I agree completely. And I actually this morning met another Tesla employee just randomly, being in Austin, around Austin. One of the benefits is that you get to meet Tesla employees randomly because, there are thousands of them around. And, he showed me the Model Y that he built himself, for himself. He worked on the production line of the Model Y that he drives. and he's so in love with the company and the product and FSD, etc. And we all are, hundreds of people in this space right now. We all believe Teslas are the best vehicles. And today, you can get a Model Y after federal tax credit in the low 30,000s. So then the question is, why aren't more people getting it? Why are they choosing the RAV4 over a Model Y today? As far as I can tell, there's really no logical answer. So Tesla Yoda, what's your answer? Why are people choosing other vehicles over Model Y? Even though Model Y is the best-selling vehicle around the world, more than 1 million sold in 2023. Why isn't it 2 million? And what does Tesla need to do to get it to 2 million?
Well, I think assuming manufacturer capacity is not an issue, that there's that supply isn't an issue. Just hearing my own extended family being converted by me, to the Tesla family, I guess is been interesting. So typically they start with worrying about range, and I think for the most part, there's enough vehicles out there that that question has been checked off. Of course, for range, there are certain parts of the consumer segment that really drive a long way. But I think for the most part, that's no longer an issue. So people understand that the range is a non-factor, especially with superchargers, with the Tesla network. Uh, then it really becomes stories that they've heard, and I've heard many of these stories, which is someone uh, is not knowing how to operate one, or it's tricky, it's too technical, it's too high tech. No different from how people had maybe difficulties going from feature phones to smartphones. If we remember back then, it wasn't automatic that people were rushing to the iPhone platform, like where on my keyboard, where's the buttons, So I feel like there is this high tech, in a bad sense of the word, that is a barrier right now, and I've heard a lot of that.
I'll add that I think Tesla's pricing awareness, I think their safety awareness is just extremely low. Um, oh, one second, I'm getting a message. Uh, yeah, and their ease of use awareness is really low. You just can't expect word of mouth alone, I think, to get you to 20 million vehicle sales per year. Tesla's reached the early adopters and some early majority people, and that's great. The Model Y became the best-selling car in the world because of them. But I still feel like we've only scratched the surface on, EV education and awareness. And I think we're at a point now where Tesla does need to step up its efforts to reach those people. Because I think a lot of people feel like, okay, they're currently driving a gas car, and they feel like it's too much of a jump for them to go from a gas car to a pure EV. So they opt for a hybrid, which is why we're seeing Toyota hybrid sales skyrocket, and those are doing well. Because a lot of people feel like they need the gateway to get to the EV, when really, for a lot of people, especially in urban areas and suburban areas, you can live with an EV in your daily life, and it's just a great experience. There's really no issues with charging anxiety in those areas. If you go on long road trips, or maybe if you live in an apartment or in more rural areas, those are certainly concerns. But for most people that live around the cities and suburbans, it's not an issue. And cold weather performance is fine for the most part. Um, the prices are just insanely low right now compared to where they were a couple of years ago, but most people don't know that.
Yeah, and keep in mind, great point. Keep in mind that the typical shopping process, the consumer is going to be visiting traditional dealers, and you could imagine what they're saying about Tesla. And so there's this sort of on marketing that goes on when someone's maybe, got a step close, two step forward, but as they visit um, other car dealerships, they get kind of this, one step forward, two step back factor. And that is very real. You can't expect the average consumer to not look at other vehicles during the shopping process.
Thank you. Any questions or comments from the audience? You're welcome to request to speak. Sawyer, you said Tesla needs to step up its efforts, and they have been, right, this year especially. I would say they're pushing on maybe a dozen fronts in terms of ads and marketing. What did you think of this upgraded Model 3 video they just published a couple of days ago?
Those videos are great. They typically don't reach much farther outside of the Tesla bubble because they're just posted on Tesla's accounts, and we share it. But for the most part, they don't reach a lot of new people. Um, but we have seen Tesla start to advertise on X. I can't imagine they. I imagine they will expand to Instagram soon. Starlink ads are all over Instagram, so I imagine Tesla will go there soon. Uh, we are seeing them more and more go to auto shows, which is great because a lot of those people aren't necessarily up to date on a lot of EV related stuff. And Tesla's went to the Chicago Auto Show recently, now to the Toronto one. Both of those auto shows are the largest in their respective countries, and they both get 300,000 visitors each. So that's 600,000 people. And the Cybertruck is one of those vehicles you really need to see in person. So Tesla's been bringing the Cybertruck to both, and people are seeing it there for the first time and seeing its presence. And then, of course, they have the other vehicles, the 3, the Y, the S and X. So it gives a lot of people that probably have never, maybe even never been near a Tesla in their life, their first exposure, which is a good thing. And then the Tesla people there can help educate them. I would like to see Tesla experiment with more traditional advertising as well, maybe on just TV, because I feel like those people, like that's what partly why I like to go on CNBC, because I feel like I'm reaching a lot of people that have really low EV education. Um, Tesla's, of course, is not going to jump, head first into a lot of this stuff. They want to dip their toe in and see what works, see what doesn't, and adjust their strategies. That makes sense. Overall, I think the ROI for Tesla advertising has to be like really good. Return on investment has to be good, just because awareness is so low.
Well, they also have Google Links, right? Google Ads. They
Yep.
do. They provide incentives as well in terms of $1,000 off, 3 months of FSD transfer, lifetime supercharging transfer, lowest prices ever.
I think a lot of that stuff you just mentioned helps for like the current fleet base, like the current owners, but not a lot of people outside of the bubble know about that stuff because Tesla can't reach them unless they're in their email or number system. Uh, so they really have to rely on word of mouth to help spread that most of the time. Or I guess there's a little bit of ads that they're doing on YouTube and whatnot.
Okay. Do you want to talk about Giga Mexico a little bit? Troy says if groundwork for Giga Mexico begins in mid-March, the factory should be ready for production by the end of January 2026. Do you agree with that estimate?
Uh, it's hard to say because just because it's like Giga Texas, let's say, took a certain amount of time, or another factory, it doesn't mean this new one, which I guess is going to use state of the art design and technology, that this one will take a similar amount of time. Um, it really depends. Mexico is pretty good at building stuff, but I think the governor of Nuevo Leon, he was the one who said that he spoke to Tesla management, and that I guess they were tried to start this month, but there were some delays or whatever, and I guess they might lay the first quote unquote bricks, first stones in the construction process next month. I don't fully believe the governor there because he said a lot of this stuff in the past, and it's not always accurate. That doesn't mean he's wrong. It could just be that Tesla is just constantly changing their mind on this stuff. Uh, it seems like Tesla's been hesitant to sort of start this because they just want to see where things are going. But I hope it does start next month. And Troy's probably right that it would be or late 2025, maybe early 26 when it would open.
Tesla Yoda?
Yeah, I'm glad that they've delayed that and actually started the line closer to the engineers in Giga Texas. So yeah, I think if you zoom out, maybe a 12-month delay of Giga Mexico seems dire, but it won't be in the long run.
Yeah. Do you guys believe Tesla will return to 50% annual production growth, or do you think that's a thing of the past?
I think it'll be difficult to return to 50% CAGR from the original 2020 number on like a compounded annual basis or whatever. Especially if growth this year is slower. But yeah, like from a year over year perspective, I guess yes, they could reach that at some point, but I don't expect that this year.
Yeah, I think when it's going to be slow, so we're in between, we're in the trough of those two major growth curves, and uh, I think 50% will be blown. They'll blow past 50% when the next gen vehicle reaches volume production. So yeah, I think we're in a trough right now. But again, if you zoom out, accounting for the next gen vehicle timelines, um, on average, they will reach and maintain that 50%.
I think the tough thing for investors now is like we just have to wait for things to play out. And a lot of people are short-term focused, and that's tough for them. With Tesla, you just got to hang in there. You could, I think a criticism of Tesla could be like, well, we should have never been in this. There should have never been a waiting period of 18 months between, sort of where they feel like they're reaching the end of COGS declines with the 3 and the Y, and then introducing the new cheaper vehicle. Um, but the Cybertruck, should take, I think they said like 18 months to fully ramp up or be a positive contributor to cash flow or something. And probably another 18 months until we maybe see the design or production start of the next gen vehicle. I'm hoping they're sandbagging a little bit on that late 2025 timeline and sort of more towards the mid 2025 timeframe, especially because they don't need to build a whole new factory for that. They can just start that at Giga Texas. But this assumes that they can figure out the the line design, which I think they will. But yeah, we just got to be patient, wait for things to play out. And then, of course, later this year we have the new mega factory coming online in Shanghai, which should be great for energy expansion.
Thank you. We talked about quite a bit today on this Monday. Its markets are closed, so it's kind of a slow news day. But today we talked about Nvidia earnings that are coming out on Wednesday, and we talked about Nvidia's moat over other companies. We compared Nvidia to Tesla's future. We talked about Jensen a little bit. We talked about generative AI. We talked about Rivian, Lucid earnings that are also going to come out on Wednesday. Talked about Troy's estimate for production deliveries for Q1. We talked about V12.2.1, BYD stock buyback, UAW versus Ford, and some advertising marketing discussion as well as Giga Mexico. Any questions, comments, please request to speak. Otherwise, we're going to end the space. Do either of the speakers have anything to say on any new topic? I have time if you guys want to hang around and keep talking. Otherwise, we
I
can end the space.
I just saw Gregor Truck. He posted a video. Looks like 6 or 7 Cybertrucks in Utah. First Utah deliveries are about to start. Exciting.
Yeah, Cybertruck production seems to be ramping nicely. We saw pictures of 80 of them in a parking lot, but that obviously doesn't mean all 80 of them were produced in one day, right, Sawyer?
Yeah, correct.
Yeah. What do you think is the production rate these days?
I haven't been watching the videos lately. But maybe like I don't know, like a couple dozen a day,
A
a few
couple dozen a
dozen.
day? Yeah, a few dozen. Yeah, it's still in the dozens of day kind of range. Tesla Yoda, how do you feel about the Cybertruck production ramp so far?
I think it's probably tougher than they thought, so I'm not too optimistic on the ramp up. But yeah, I'm a long-term investor, and much like when we were really honed in on how Model Y is going to go, how Model 3 was going to go. Eventually, it's going to ramp. So it's really the TAM that will matter in the long run. So the question is, for me, is less about uh, how production is going right now at the 1,000 kind of level, but eventually, how large will the TAM prove out to be? Is it a 100,000 vehicle per year vehicle? Is it 250? Is it a half a million type vehicle? And I think right now the expectation, I believe, is the 250 mark, right?
Right, that's
Mm,
the
yeah.
it sounds like that's the nameplate capacity of the production line installed. Do you think it'll stay there?
Yeah, I think what'll be interesting is we know the U.S. markets, it's guaranteed to be at that level. Um, Wonder if anyone knows about the truck market in China specifically, and whether, yeah, it seems like the tour, people love the truck, but just wondering if the market for truck is, how that compares with passenger vehicles in China.
It's my understanding is that it's small, but it may be limited with pollution concerns and related regulation. So a Cybertruck obviously doesn't create pollution like ICE vehicles do. So I wonder if Cybertruck would expand that truck market in China and elsewhere in the world.
It looks like truck sales in China were 2.9 million in 2022, which I don't know if those include Class 8 trucks, but that is not very much considering the size of the country.
Yeah,
So,
so
so
that's basically the, kind of for me, the way I look at it is how many 250,000 markets are there? Uh, is there one in China? We know Shanghai can produce it, but is there such a market?
I guess we'll find out. So what indications would you be watching to figure out whether the answer to that question is yes or no?
Yeah, I mean, if they start a line in Giga Shanghai or expanded line there, obviously they know. Um, because yeah, it's China is obviously the largest EV market. So um, you know, the other way they could potentially do this is to create maybe like a slightly smaller version of the Cybertruck. But I know they were thinking about it, but maybe through that way. Yeah, not sure if you guys know the latest on a smaller version of the Cybertruck.
I haven't heard anything about that, but Sawyer, do you have any updates, rumors, news about a smaller version of the Cybertruck?
No, I haven't heard a thing.
Yeah, yeah, interesting, interesting. All right, I know Nibal Salha has a question he earlier posted on YouTube Live, and he's here to ask it. It's unrelated topic, but go ahead, Nibal.
Yeah, thanks, Yaman. I just have a question because I myself have bought a used Model 3. So I guess my question is, how do you guys think about like the like used cars? How that kind of might cannibalize like new car sales, especially since we might have to wait till the end of 2025 to get the new model, right? Like we have potentially 2 million Model Ys that might go onto the market, onto the used market specifically.
Thank you, Nibal. How do you guys feel about the declining prices of used Teslas? Do you think that's competition for new Teslas? Sawyer?
I mean, maybe a little. It's not because like it's mostly the biggest reason for the drop in the aftermarket for used Teslas is because Tesla themselves has been dropping prices of new Teslas by upwards of 25-30%. If they hadn't done that, then the used market would be in better shape right now. Um, Also, I don't know if I agree with that. Like a ton of Model Ys will be flooding the market next year. I mean, like Model Y sales only started in like March-ish of 2020, so they're only around 4 years old right now. Typically, people don't keep their cars only for 5 years. Maybe on some of them on leases, but very, very few Teslas are on leases overall. So I don't expect a huge flooding of the market.
Yeah, not to mention that that's when the production started, but then it took a year or two to ramp production. So on average, the weighted average of the age of the Model Y fleet is probably like 2 years. Plus,
Yeah.
Tesla said in the last earnings call that 90% of buyers are new buyers. So people aren't really getting rid of their Model Ys. That's not going to happen for a couple of years. Tesla Lee?
Hey Omar, hey everyone, or sorry, Yaman. So I got my dealer license. I think I told you guys about that, my used car dealer license, because I wanted to kind of track the prices of EVs and Tesla specifically. And I'll tell you, some of the people that want to buy cars from me will never buy a new car. So no matter what the price is, they've always bought used, they will always buy used. So I think there is a market for used EVs for those people. So I don't think that's really cannibalizing new car sales per se. Might maybe a little bit, but there's a lot of people that won't buy a new car.
I will say when it comes to Teslas, I feel like people are willing to jump to a new car maybe the first time in their life. My mother, for example, she only bought used cars her entire life until she was 71. She owned a 10-year-old Honda CRV, and then she traded that in for a brand new Tesla Model Y that was in a price bracket that she would have never considered in the years prior, but she wanted a Tesla so badly that she went for that.
Would she have bought a used one if there was like inventory that was more than just a few hundred, maybe like you know a lot more? Because right now there
Um,
really isn't a big inventory.
Potentially. So she got hers in early 2022. So obviously then there was like nothing out there. And even used prices like were pretty insane. It's maybe something she would have considered, but I think she sort of viewed it as this might just be my last car of my life. She keeps this for like 10, 12 years and she's in her early 70s. So I think she just figured I'll just get it new.
Yeah, especially I think more people would be willing to get a used one just because once people learn that Tesla does over the air software updates, everything from what is it, since the Gen 3 with the new or hardware 3, I'm sorry, that Elon pretty much says it's going to be FSD capable. So you're always getting these updates. So really an older car will still feel like new just because of the updates.
All right. This space has been going on for more than 2.5 hours. We're approaching 3 hours. We have YouTube live chat going on at the same time, which supports my watch hours. I need another 1,000 hours to get to monetization. So I really appreciate it that people on YouTube live chat are supporting me towards that goal. I think this is probably enough for today. So let's continue tomorrow. Tomorrow is going to be the first day of trading for this week. And I think we covered quite a bit today. Thank you very much to all the speakers and the listeners. It was fun. And I'll talk to you guys tomorrow. Take care. Good night.